The recording is going. Enjoy.
Alrighty, everyone. So welcome to our session. We're so excited to have you here. This is a very different.
We're having some.
Very,
I realized I had my headphones in, so I was hearing Oscar talking, but you weren't. Okay, there we go. Oh my gosh.
alrighty. So like I said, we're working through the technical difficulties of today's session, but hopefully we can still get you the content and all the information that you came here to get. And so basically what this session will do for us is to really help us dive into unpacking who we are, what identities it is that we hold, and how we can use them to help us empower our communities, but also give you the tools necessary to help you have your conversations within your organizations as well. And so to kind of start us off, we'll start off by introducing ourselves. My name is Oscar Celis. I use he, him, his pronouns, and I am the graduate intern for fraternity and sorority life here at BG, along as a first year graduate student in the college student personnel program.
Hi everyone, my name is Emma Pennington. I use she, her, hers pronouns. I am a second year graduate student in the college student personnel program and a practicum student in fraternity and sorority life. My primary assistantship is in the Business Career Accelerator in the College of Business, and I'm really looking forward to working with everyone today despite the tech issues that we're having. So really, much of our inspiration for the content today comes from the book White Fragility by Robin DiAngelo, which was published in 2016. So what we'll be discussing kind of lines up with our four main areas of content. So we'll be discussing white privilege and white fragility, understanding the definitions of the two and how they influence each other. We'll be talking about microaggressions, what they are and how to respond to them. We'll be discussing performative allyship, and how to be an active ally. And we'll also be talking about confronting white fragility in ourselves and in others. So a lot of what I just said is very definition-based. You might not know all of it, you might know some of it, and that's totally okay. We'll get there by the end of our time together.
Perfect. And so we want to set some ground rules to really ensure that the conversations that we're having today are both educational and beneficial for everyone here today. And so to start us off, we do want to acknowledge that this is a brave space where we do want to challenge some of the thinking that we might come into the space with, and as well as the biases that we might just have as a result of how we grew up and just like the environments that we have surrounded ourselves in. We also do want to be mindful of the things that we do put in the chat. Of course, we do want you to engage with us, so feel free to use that function, but just be respectful of everyone in the room with what you do type in there. We also all know the Vegas rules. So what is learned here leaves here, and what is said here stays here. So if someone does choose to share some information about themselves, we do want to just make a commitment to keep personal information within the Zoom call. But the lessons that we do learn, we will take back to our organizations and into our lives. And then the last one is just to maintain a positive attitude and an open mind to ensure that these conversations are productive.
All right, so in terms of action steps and things we really want you to take away from this by the end of our time together, it's not enough just to stand up against racism. It's really important for organizations to be anti-racist, and that means fully fighting against and challenging systems of oppression. So we want you to be able to challenge and correct members' actions in your organization. We want you to really be able to examine recruitment ideology and the history of your organizations. We also really want to highlight and emphasize the importance of amplifying Black voices and people of color in your organizations, because if there's lived experiences that they're having that we can't necessarily speak into as white people, it's so important to make sure that they're heard and that they can share their own experiences. That ties into tokenizing, which we'll talk about a little bit as well. And then we also really want to emphasize unlearning racist history for any organizations, but also unlearning racist history that's been taught in the educational system, right? We haven't always gotten the full picture of everything that's happened just because it could potentially be whitewashed. And finally, we want organizations to take racism as seriously as hazing. There's often so many initiatives and policy regarding hazing, but this is something that we want to see organizations treat on the same level.
So in order to have these conversations with our organization, with the students that we work with, it's really helping them acknowledge that that they do take up space, right? And the world will, that their worldview will be, you know, discovered through these identities that they hold. And so a way that we can do that is by helping them unpack their own identities and help them understand what intersections that they have within themselves, as a way to help them understand that there is a larger community aspect to all of these things. I think oftentimes college age students have a very self-centered frame of mind, that they just are focusing on what they need to do to graduate, to succeed in an organization and things like that, without really thinking of the broader community. And so that is something that we want to push for, especially through these kind of activities. And so members of your organization, and especially those new members, could really benefit from those initial meetings, being able to unpack those identities to help them see who is in the room, what identities they might share with other people, and what makes them stand out from everyone else in the organization. I think oftentimes there might be some parts of our identities that we might forget about, but nevertheless, they're still there, and they do impact how we see the world, and vice versa, how the world sees us. And so towards the end of the meeting, I will go ahead and put an identity wheel worksheet that we have used in prior presentations and prior activities, that will help guide these conversations. So you'll be able to see a wheel that's similar to this one, that has examples of what it means to fall into each category, along with some discussion questions to follow the activity up with, to help you unpack that even more. And so just a quick share, if you want to use a chat function, if anyone can share some identities that they themselves might not think about as often, or might forget they even have. And so I'm going to stop sharing for 2 seconds so I can see any responses that might come. But are there any identities that you might not think about as often? Alrighty, let me go ahead and share again. Right, and so once we make our members aware of the identities that they might have, the next part of that conversation is helping them understand what parts that they have privilege in. And the reason that we want that is to help them understand that it is basically their responsibility to help uplift others who are being oppressed and who might not have privilege in certain areas. And so something that I do want to emphasize, and I think is often overlooked, is that the idea that the presence of privilege doesn't mean that there's an absence of struggle, right? There's identities that you can still be privileged in, but there might still be some hardships in your life. But we want to get students to kind of think past that, and what identities are making it harder for other people to continue in their life. And so once we're able to start these conversations, it will have an impact on how we move forward in our college education.
Okay, so before we really dive into the concept of white fragility and what it is, I want to add a disclaimer a little bit. When it comes to just learning and unlearning what we've learned about race and racism, I think it's really important to remember that none of us are going to do this perfectly 100% of the time, right? I think often people really get nervous about confronting racism because they're afraid of saying the wrong thing, or that it's not going to come across the right way. But the more that we take steps past our comfort zones and really speaking out and working for change, the more that we learn and grow in confidence. And I know I certainly haven't arrived in this. I'm not sitting here today saying that, oh, I 100% do this perfectly all the time, but I think it's really important to remember that the more we try, the easier it is and the more confident we can become. So before we can really start examining what white fragility is, we need to make sure we understand what the concept of privilege is. So this is probably a term that people are more familiar with. So privilege is a right, immunity, or benefit enjoyed by a particular person or restricted group of people beyond the advantages of most. So based on that definition of privilege, we can define white privilege as the ability to move through life disregarding how your race impacts your experience. So having those two definitions in mind, we can say that white fragility occurs when a white person is called out for racially problematic behavior. So this can be something that stems from being in a position of power and privilege. The author of White Fragility, Robin DiAngelo, there's a quote that I love at the beginning of that book that I think just really encompasses what white fragility is and how we can see that. And she says, one of the greatest social fears for a white person is being told that something we have said or done is racially problematic. Yet when someone lets us know that we have done such a thing, rather than respond with gratitude and relief, we often respond with anger and denial. So, when we think about privilege, and I think American culture, in terms of how people who are white respond, there's this narrative in the United States that, I worked hard and I got myself here. I pulled myself up by my bootstraps. I endured hardship, but I worked hard enough and, I got to where I am today and I'm successful because of that. But that narrative doesn't really take into account that because of privilege, people are born into different positions or have different experiences with social mobility or access to education. So in terms of a real life example of white privilege and white fragility in action, this summer with the Black Lives Matter movement really gaining traction, there are many white people who would respond with, well, all lives matter. Black lives just don't matter. All lives matter as well. But acting out in anger to the statement Black Lives Matter, really, when you think about it, that's not, acknowledging the struggle of one racial group that's very real and very present in terms of experiencing things that white people don't. That's a great example of white fragility in action, because people don't want to accept necessarily that, there's people of color in the country that are at a disadvantage just because of the systems of oppression that exist. So next slide, please. So performative allyship. Oops, wrong slide. Next one. There we go. All right. So performative allyship can kind of tie into this concept of white fragility as well. So when we think of the word ally or allyship, an ally is someone who's a supporter, who steps in and helps other people. So performative allyship is talking the talk without walking the walk, right? You're aligning yourself with a cause without doing any of the work. You're not really taking action. So some examples of this could just be posting hashtags in response to an event that's occurred, going to a march or protest in order to make yourself feel good about being involved or maybe woke. And I think a great example of this that occurred recently that a lot of people participated in was Blackout Tuesday. So it might seem like it was a long time ago, but back on June 2nd, in response to the murders of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and Ahmaud Arbery, everyone was encouraged by a few organizers to post a black square on their Instagram with the hashtag Blackout Tuesday. Now, the problem with this, although it might seem good because people are showing solidarity, the issue is that with that hashtag, there was actual and helpful information for protesters and activists and organizers that was blocked because there's thousands upon thousands of people using that hashtag with just a black square. So, like I said, it's easy to condemn racism. It's not hard to identify that it's wrong, but not everyone actually chooses to back up those words with true, lasting action that isn't performative and that isn't something that you're using to make yourself feel better about yourself or feel that you're woke.
So kind of going along with things that folks might do, might have different intentions, but just delivered in the wrong manner, are microaggressions. And I crossed out the micro part because in fact, these do cause a lot of harm for people. And so microaggressions are really just acts of prejudice that can take a large toll on somebody else, right? That they can be intentional or not. They can range from just being outright racist to a more hidden form of microaggressions that can just invalidate experiences for folks. And so these slights and slurs are very harmful to marginalized communities. And it's really important to talk about these in more than just race. Oftentimes people just put microaggressions and race together, but it's especially the ones that we saw within that wheel in the earlier slides. So we're talking about sexual orientation, disability, gender, even environmental microaggressions can be harmful for folks. When thinking about environmental microaggressions, you can, it's the idea that you can choose to stay somewhere, you will just have to be uncomfortable about it. So if you're thinking about a person working in an office and a person of color working in an office, and there's paintings hanging up all over the walls, yet there's no people of color in them. And so now they're super aware that that is a thing that their company does. And they have to now live with it since they have to go to work to be able to pay rent and do all of those things, even if they might feel uncomfortable in this situation. It's something that someone of um, not of color could not pay attention to, but it does really affect the way that somebody works. And so another form of microaggression could be tokenism, which is a microaggression that gives a false sense of belonging and diversity. Christine Kim, I think, really nails it in her definition as the act of using minorities as diversity props to justify their progress and inclusivity. We want to make sure that those students within our organizations are diverse, are able to help us challenge our own thinking. I'm always saying that there's no learning happening in a vacuum. If you're constantly reaffirmed in your ideas and you're not being challenged on them, that can be quite harmful to your development as well. And so it's super important to make sure that the people that do come into our organizations are able to help us gain a wider range of experiences and identities and things like that. So the reason that microaggressions are so harmful is really because you can never measure someone's experience. And so if you or someone in your organization says something that is taken as microaggressive, a common defense might be, oh, I didn't mean it that way. Right, you might have not meant it that way, or they might have not meant it that way, but at that point it was already said. So we have to get our organization members and ourselves to understand that our words do carry power. And it's always more important to understand the impact that it might have rather than the intent that we used it in. Another common microaggression that I've seen people use is this idea of, but I don't see color. Um, People use this as a way to say, oh, I'm not racist. I'm not, um, I have Black friends, I have gay friends, things like that. But really what people are saying when they say this is that you are then not validating the experiences that folks might have, the experiences that shaped them and made them into the person that they are today, right? It's also saying, I see the system, I see that the system is broken and affecting people differently, but it's much easier for me to ignore it by saying I don't see color. And so this really is rooted in ignorance and failure to want to educate yourself and be progressive in your thoughts. And so it's getting people to acknowledge that fact that you can't ignore the facts simply because you don't want to and it's more comfortable. If people aren't comfortable, they're usually not learning. And so you have to be able to take these experiences and learn from them.
Okay, I have a video we'd like to share with you all. So this is the author of White Fragility, Robin DiAngelo, and she's speaking about how white fragility reinforces racism. And she uses a really great comparison of getting in shape to illustrate that we thought was really good and very easy to understand and applicable. So we'll take a look at this and hope you enjoy and get a lot out of it.
White fragility is the defensiveness, the argumentation, the hurt feelings, the withdrawal that often erupts whenever white people are challenged on their racial worldviews.
You know what? This is a color-free zone here. Stanley, I don't look at you as another race.
See, this is what I'm talking about. We don't have to pretend that we're colorblind.
Exactly.
That's fighting ignorance with more ignorance.
The fragility part is meant to capture how little it takes to cause white people to erupt in defensiveness. But the impact of that defensiveness, however, is not fragile at all. It functions as a kind of everyday white racial control by making it so difficult for people to challenge us on our unaware assumptions and biases that most of the time they don't. And so it functions to keep everybody in their place and protect the racial hierarchy.
No, I'm not a racist. I am the least racist person you have ever interviewed. That I can tell you.
Some defensiveness is natural. It's a natural part of the process. The key is that you must move through that defensiveness. It's defensiveness that functions to refuse to engage, to protect a very limited worldview, to let in no information or no challenge.
Guys, come on, okay? I just want to be able to do and say whatever I want, whenever I want, and I don't want to have to think about the world's problems.
It serves us not to speak about it. Racism is the status quo. It is the status quo of your society, of my society, of all Western-oriented white settler colonialist cultures. And that status quo of racism is comfortable for me as a white person virtually 24/7.
This country's judicial system has not been great for us.
No. Here comes a 2-hour lecture on black stuff. God, I wish my proxy were here. Go ahead.
So I am not going to get to where I need to go from a place of white comfort. I'm going to have to get mighty uncomfortable in order to challenge that.
When somebody tells me that they don't see race, I say, I mean, that's fine. You can choose not to see the sky, but it exists.
The number one question I'm asked is, what do we do? And before I answer that, I want to offer a couple of challenges to that question because I find it a very problematic question. So the first thing is to think long and deep about what it took for you to ask that question. How in 2020, your question could be, what do I do about racism? How you have managed not to know, and write down how you have managed to be a full functioning adult in 2020 and not know what to do about racism. And everything you write down will be your map, and nothing you write down will be easy to address, but everything on it can be addressed. And then get to work. It's like saying, I want to be in shape tomorrow. You won't be in shape tomorrow. And to get in shape will be a multi-part process. After you've made that list, one of the next things I would ask you to do is to take Dr. Eddie Moore's 21-day challenge and read Layla Said's book, Me and White Supremacy Workbook. Both of those are active processes that will put you on the path.
What you can do is extend that privilege so that you can dismantle it, right? So you can create opportunity for people, you can amplify issues in ways that other people can't, and you can use your resources to create space for people.
Let's switch seats.
Our voices have been missing from the table for far too long. And by not talking to one another, a couple of things are reinforced. One, we reinforce this idea that we're outside of race. We continually put the burden, the psychic energy of race onto people of color. And most of the time, we discount what they have to say.
You don't think you will ever change and write books that incorporate white lives into them substantially? You can't understand how powerfully racist that question is, can you? Because you could never ask a white author, when are you going to write about black people?
I am not dismissed as being biased or playing the race card or having a chip on my shoulder when I challenge racism. It doesn't mean I don't get dismissed, but the impact of that dismissal doesn't hurt me in the same way that it hurts when we dismiss people of color. This is the most complicated social dilemma of the last several hundred years. We need many angles, many approaches, and many voices.
Okay, so just based off of that video, we have some questions that we thought you could work through individually, and that would be great to take back to your organizations and really dig into this more. So on an individual level, think about if you've seen yourself falling into any traps in terms of microaggressions or performative allyship. And then on a more holistic level, let's think about your organization. Have there been any patterns that you've seen of inaction or microaggressions that are occurring? We also want to challenge you to think what your organization can do to be more inclusive using the information presented today. So examine your practices and look at who's coming to events or joining and who's not, and think about how to make that more inclusive. And finally, how can you use your privilege to break down systems of oppression? So reflect on that as an individual and then as an organization as well. Okay, so like I said, a lot of our inspiration and content came from White Fragility. So this is just a shot of the cover. You can find it on Amazon, any major bookseller. Just a really good book for anyone of any level of knowledge to dive into and just learn more about the topics that we've talked about today. All right, and then these two articles we also used. Why you should think twice before sharing your Blackout Tuesday posts on Instagram, as well as social justice and inclusion resources for fraternity and sorority life from Colorado State that are also really applicable to organizations across the board, not just Greek organizations. And then we also utilize this article as well.
So we want to go ahead and open up the floor for questions if you have any. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so I can see the chat and the Q&A function. But are there any questions that any of you might have in order to further these conversations or anything of the sorts?
I also like to add, I'm interested just to see what organizations participants are involved in. So if you just want to drop in the chat your involvement, that would be great as well.
In the chat, I'm also sending the questions that we proposed to kind of think about, as well as the, oh, if I can get it. And just in case you need them to kind of think about. Okay, we have some Alpha Chi Omega, welcome.
Also, I'm sorry, I'm not a panelist, but if you would want to utilize the to talk to ask your question, I can also give you permission to talk. Just put in the chat saying, hey, I would like to ask my question live, and then I can allow you to talk that way.
Welcome, welcome. Do we have any questions, comments? Anything anyone would like to share?
Anyone would have further questions or want to talk about how to implement some changes in their organizations, you could also reach out to us. Oscar and I are within fraternity and sorority life, and I know there's some Greek people watching this, so feel free to reach out as well.
I did put our contact information if anyone does have any further questions or any follow-up to the presentation.
All right, so if there's no further questions, thanks so much for spending some time with us today. We hope that you got a lot from it, and we hope that the rest of the time spent at the conference today is meaningful and impactful for you all.
Thanks, everybody.
Can't see either of the.
Sorry, I know.
No, you're good.
I feel like it's just a big white blur, is it?
Yeah, basically. I was like, there's something out there.
I think this way will work better. But this way they couldn't see you. I should have done this way probably.
Oh, Lauren.
She's one of my students.
Fun.
Should we go ahead and stop the recording?
Yeah, we can stop the recording.